I'd like to start by asking Jeff about the US market so far in 2021. Obviously, food service demand fell to a very low level in 2020. What are you seeing so far this year? How is that balance between retail and food service now?
Well, first of all, the entire shrimp market in 2021 couldn't be more different than what we saw in 2020. It's as divergent as I could ever have imagined. What we had obviously during 2020 was very low demand and a real problem with understanding how to inventory, how to carry inventories, because we just didn't know when things would open here in Europe also, and also we didn't know what kind of impact it was going to be in the production areas. 2021 has completely turned that issue on its head that we had in 2020. Despite the fact that so much business was closed down during 2020, and that we started the year with probably unprecedentedly high inventories that were so high that we were having difficulties getting product from the dock into warehouses. We were having to actually negotiate with warehouses where they would let us bring a container in if we got a container out. Well, again, despite the lower demand, ultimately, by attrition, those inventories began to drop, and there was very little replacement, both because importers were reticent to buy and because some of the producing countries began to have COVID problems. So what we're seeing right now is a really significant shortage of many items, many of the primary items in the US, and it's indicated both in the driving of the pricing and the fact that for the first time in 13 or 14 months, we have warehouses calling us, containers coming, and can we shift some of the business that we shifted away from them back to them? I'm specifically talking about port freezers that we had to, that couldn't handle our business before, and we had to ship products inland. This doesn't look like we're going to see any significant let up over the next few months. Food service has, as expected, exploded. The problem we had was we all kind of expected it. What we didn't know was when it would happen. So our initial thought was that business would get a lot better as restaurants in the northern states were able to start to serve again outdoors. So many of us began to, marginally or very carefully restock in anticipation that business would open up some. What we've seen instead is a pretty massive opening across the board in most states. In fact, virtually all states. And I think a lot of COVID, what are they calling it? COVID fatigue among customers. So food service, we're having the same problem that food service now that we had with retail before. When COVID first hit and product was readily available for both food service and retail business exploded, food service stopped, and most repacking product from food service packs into retail packs. In anticipation or failure to anticipate when this was going to change, and with the demand that we saw, the increased demand that we saw for retail, most of us shifted our buying to retail focused products, and consequently we're all short right now of food service products. Prices have increased dramatically. in some cases up $1 a pound. And for most customers, there is a more or less a short-term view. What they're seeing now is, oh my gosh, prices have gone up crazy. In fact, prices have only gone up back to where they pretty much normally are. And with the rebound or the prices being up is from a very low baseline that was caused by the fact that there was product available and no demand. Retail, as we talked about when we had this last webinar, retail exploded. And from what we're seeing, what we anticipated before is carrying through. It's backed off a little bit. There is not as much retail demand, or not panic demand. However, it's backed off to a point that's still significantly higher than it was before COVID. And now with food service coming back into play, what we're seeing is what we think will be indicated later in statistics of higher consumption or higher imports and consumption of shrimp. We don't have the kind of panic calls from retailers right now that we had 4 months ago, 5 months ago, but business is still very good. And just as with the food service now, we're beginning to have issues with getting product in to the right places at the right time, because now we're dealing with, curiously, when people use the term perfect storm, it's generally three things. So we have those three things happening right now. Business is picking up dramatically. The COVID is apparently rearing its ugly head again significantly in producing countries. India, and Jim mentioned to me earlier, Thailand, for example. And the container issues that we're all familiar with are significantly impacting the availability of product. So we've gone from having way too much product and freezers full to having orders that we can't fill, including orders that we did buy the product to fill, but the product hasn't shipped, or it's delayed in shipping because of container problems, or it's placed in places around the world in transshipment, and we don't know when we're going to get it. The bottom line is, I think that we're going to see food service rebound back to normal levels, and retail is not going to lose all the additional business that they picked up during COVID. We have probably a whole class of people, my daughter being one of them at 35 years old, who never cook shrimp or fish at home. It's just not something they did, and they've learned to now. And although they are going to continue to go out and have the experience of eating out in restaurants, seafood has now become I don't want to say a staple, but it's become a option for cooking at home for millions and millions of people that it wasn't before. And this is going to cause us quite a bit of problem for the next few months. Obviously, if we didn't have the container problems or the supply problems due to COVID, and that pipeline could get filled, we wouldn't be seeing this too much and then too little and too much and then too little happening. I see no immediate possibility of alleviating that problem. Business is going to keep growing. Demand is going to keep growing. And from the look of it, the supply problems are either going to stay the way they are or possibly get worse.
Right.
Just bottom line, with one question that was asked is, we're not going to see a big drop off on retail, even though food service is coming back.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Jim, I know Siam Canadian is moving a lot of shrimp kind of from the supplying countries into North America as one of its markets. Does that largely tally with what you've seen and are seeing now?
Okay. All right. Things have changed. They've changed permanently. As Jeff was saying, on the retail side, the growth in retail seafood sales will never return to pre-pandemic levels. People have gotten used to buying seafood, particularly shrimp, but other seafood as well, at their local supermarket, either in-store sales or buying it online or through e-commerce sites or whatever. People have become accustomed to cooking seafood at home. It used to be really for the majority of people. Now, there've always been strong retail sales, obviously, but it used to be for the majority of people something that you go out to eat because you don't really know how to cook seafood. You don't know how to cook shrimp or scallops or whatever, and it's kind of special occasion food anyway. So at home we have chicken or pork or steak or whatever, and when we want seafood, we go out to a restaurant. So there's a big sector of the population that has figured out that seafood is actually really simple to make. You can do a lot of things with seafood very quickly. It cooks quickly. To cook shrimp is a matter of minutes versus cooking a meat item that can take 15-20 minutes or longer. So it's fast, it's easy to do, and you can make good tasting food quickly. So there's the increase in retail sales through the course of the pandemic. That will drop off. That won't maintain these high levels once everything's completely back to normal, but it'll never go back to pre-pandemic levels. So retail has permanently gained an increased market share, and that includes e-commerce, and any type of retail, pick up whatever you want. It's all there, and that's permanent. The increase we're seeing now, the U.S. is leading that because I have to give U.S. credit. You really did a good job on the vaccinations, better than anybody, although you screwed up on the pandemic itself, but we won't get into that. But the vaccination rollout in the States has been amazing. A few other countries have done such a good job. So America's opening up first. So things are opening up, restaurants, sports events, concerts, everything. So there's a pent-up energy of people over the past 14 months of not going to restaurants and not going to events, sporting events, casinos, campgrounds, you name it, whatever. And this is happening at the most opportune time. We're just getting into summer and things are opening up. So people with all this lockdown fever are ready to go out, and they're ready to go out and spend money. And there's money to spend with the checks that Mr. Biden is sending out, and other things that are happening with the economy growing now. There's lots of money to be spent, and it will be spent. And that money will, the more money spent, the more that will create economic benefit, and more money to be spent. Yeah. So the opening of food service is going to be quite steep, in my opinion. It's going to be quite dramatic. Now, there's big sectors depending where you are in the United States. Canada will follow a bit later. Canada's a little bit behind on their vaccination, quite a bit behind actually. They haven't done as well. So they're 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 months behind the U.S. in terms of them being able to open up and get back to normal. So a lot of Canada is going to miss the summer boom, which is the U.S. is going to grab more than any other country, in fact. So people are out. They're going to be partying. They're going to be going to restaurants. They're going to be having barbecues with friends. So there's just a ton of consumption that's going to happen over the course of the next 4 months, from now through Labor Day and past. Now, retail is not just going to drop off because of that. People, as Jeff said, people have gotten used to buying seafood in retail. So retail will drop off a little, but consumption in general is going to be really, really large over the next several months. We have all the bumps in the road here. We have supply problems. We've got India, who's suffering a catastrophe in terms of their COVID situation, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel there either. Vaccination rollout is not happening, and it's a mess there, and it's terrifying what's happening there. We have the shipping problem, and the shipping problem is not going to resolve itself overnight. The shipping companies are doing wonderfully. I wish I had invested in Maersk or some of the other lines earlier in the year. I'm sure their stocks are doing well. They're making out. It's not completely their fault, but they're taking advantage of the situation. I think there's no doubt about that. I better be careful. I get some of my containers canceled if I talk too much here. So we have that. We have a lot of impact in the supply chain from producing countries such as India, where you have a problem with workers in factories now, with factories running below capacity, with farmers harvesting earlier because they're afraid of what's going to happen, as Sophia said, harvesting earlier now, and instead of harvesting shrimp, which would have been larger sizes, which are more targeted to food service, whether it be Europe or North America, they're harvesting smaller sizes, which are more retail oriented, and they're going to have an abundance of these. And then I don't know what will happen later in the year when they were supposed to be harvesting the larger sizes. I think those will come up short. Indonesia's been under a lot of pressure this year, good pressure. Retail purchases out of Indonesia have been very, very strong. And they continue. And Indonesia prices, as Sophia says in her weekly blog, Indonesia prices have been firming up. Vietnam, surprisingly, their prices have weakened a little bit, but their exports are very strong nevertheless. So I don't think that's going to be a long-lived situation. The real story. There are two stories here. There's food service and there's retail. Retail had a huge shot in the arm because of COVID. Retail will continue stronger than it did pre-COVID, but it will drop off to a degree. But you've got this massive increase in food service consumption over the next 4 months. And that's going to tell a story in itself in terms of pricing, in terms of availability, in terms of pressure on producing countries, and in terms of shipments. It's not only a problem of cold storages being full because of lack of sales, which may have been a case in the past, but just the massive amount, the volume going into the supply chain, it's bottlenecking. It's bottlenecking in major ports in the United States. It's bottlenecking into cold storages, even though there is movement, but there's just a matter of available truckers and available space and how things go in and out. So regardless of sales or lack of sales, there is congestion in the ports. There's congestion getting in from the ports to cold storages. There is problems with lack of containers. So this is something. Now this is a bump. This is not a permanent situation. The shipping lines put more containers and have more available vessels. They're going to make more money ultimately. So it's not in their interest to keep everybody at their mercy as we are now with absurd increases in freight. I mean, I'm seeing our office in China where we were at $8,000 for a container going to $16,000. I mean, crazy stuff, just nuts. And not having containers available, having producers and exporters not wanting to sell on door delivery basis anymore, as they have for many importers and retailers, wanting to only ship into a container yard because they don't want to deal with the aggravation and the uncertainty of managing trucking from a container yard to a final destination to a door delivery. So things like that will continue. I think that the shipping issue is going to be will take us through to the end of the year. It's not going to get resolved within the next few months. It's going to get worse over the summer as shipments into the U.S. increase and Canada follows. The EU, as they open up, they will have the same thing. Things will be opening up there. In the EU, seafood has traditionally been more of a food service item than a retail item, although retail has always been strong. So as they open up, there's going to be a massive increase in demand there. So I think what we're looking at for the next, I see no possibility of a weakness in the market between now and January 1st. And I would be very surprised if we saw a weakness in the market in the first quarter of 22. Eventually, maybe production gets back to normal. India gets through their COVID issues. Other countries get through their COVID issues. The shipments, the shipping lines, improvement with container availability and vessel availability, etc., then things will taper off and things will even out. I think we have a permanent permanent increase in seafood consumption, period. Okay?
Mm.
Not just it's going from retail will drop and food service will come back up. We have a permanent increase in seafood consumption. Now, to what percent that would be, I don't know. But without question, it's become a more important. Let's say it used to be more of a special food. I mean, not all special. Obviously, you have small, shrimp retail, which is not special. It's pretty cheap. It's cheaper than pork or beef or whatever. But for the large part, it isn't. It's more mainstream now. I put it that way. So you've got the premium items, black tiger shrimp and crab and lobster and scallops, going for white tablecloth restaurants or premium retail. And then you have the cheaper mainstream stuff. But it's all become more mainstream now, and that I think is what's going to happen. So I think permanent increase in seafood consumption, a dropping off of retail, maybe sometime this year you'll see retail consumption dropping to some degree, but I don't think a big drop. And food service will be ratcheting strong through the end of the year.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Sophia, it was kind of the question that you posed at the end of your presentation, but how do you see the outlook for kind of the different European markets in terms of food service and retail, at least in the near term?
I think as I've mentioned earlier, the European industry for the food sector actually just has reopened, not like the US. In Europe, it just actually reopened. So like in the previous week. So it's expected, of course, that in the short term that this trend may likely be in demand. So the food service sector will start demanding more, and of course, Europe is a hot tourist destination as well. And with all the summer coming soon, and I mean the summer coming soon, and the hot weather becoming more stable also with the weather. So we expect that demand to also be translated in the food service sector. So I think I agree also that that people are now more accustomed to cooking more convenience products from the retail, and that will not soon like quickly go away indeed, because as I've mentioned earlier, there are still some people who have enjoyed doing that at home. But on the short term, I think there will indeed be a spike in the food service sector as more people get confident in going to restaurants, and also the tourism industry also reopens.
Sure, thank you. Okay, Gabriel, I wanted to ask you about the Chinese market primarily, as that's an area that obviously is a lot of suppliers have found difficult to ship to, particularly in 2020, and it's sort of a market that you can offer some good insight into, I think.
Well, the Chinese market for Ecuador has been extremely important over the past 8 or 10 years, driving the growth in Ecuador's production with their demand. So it is a very important market for us. In 2020, when they started to do COVID checks in the cardboards and in the containers, they definitely affected and scared a lot of exporters and importers. The exporters on the one side in Ecuador have to think twice before sending a container that has been fully disinfected and sprayed and gone through a lot of process, which was put in place by them in a joint effort with the local authorities in Ecuador, plus the private companies, the exporters. And they all went through a very thorough process of reaching an agreement on what was the proper protocols. But even then, nothing guarantees that you don't find COVID on a box, because it's not live COVID that they're finding. It's not something you touch and you put in your face and you get COVID from. It's the strains or DNA from COVID. So I mean, if it was there sometime, it might still be there, even though you sprayed it and it's not alive and it's dead and it's not useful, whatever it is. So this caused a contraction on the, I want to say, on people's confidence to export to China. So when the Chinese importers came to us after Chinese New Year, purchases in November of 2020, which was, again, they wanted the shrimp and they paid a higher price, and we exported a lot of volume towards them. We had been preparing to shift our volumes elsewhere. We had been preparing all of 2020. After March, we prepared to shift our volumes to P&D products, to retail in Europe, retail in the States, to headless products. We tried everything to steer away from China because of our dependency from them and the fact that they were going up and down in their demand. That fluctuation cost us internal problems and prices. So towards the end of the year, they had a good sourcing from us, a good season purchasing in November from us for their head-on Chinese New Year consumption. And in December, when they came back to us and said, well, listen, we want your shrimp, but we can't pay that new price that you guys have. Why do you have a higher price? Well, we had a higher price because now we had and were supplying different markets. And in January and December, we had a completely new redistribution of our shrimp market, completely new in January. Now, that changes over the past 4 months. From January until April 2021, it has changed because in January, Ecuador only had 100 million pounds of shrimp in the month. So out of that 100 million pounds, Ecuador had 34 or 30 sent to the US, 30 or 34 sent to Europe, and there was another 35 left, of which 10 million went to Thailand, who was buying to reprocess shrimp. So 10 million was sent there, and then that left only 20 million for the Chinese market, right? So all of these other markets that were very interesting decreased the supply availability for the Chinese market. And once the Chinese importers saw that it wasn't a 1 month deal, that it was a trend, that they were being left to the last option, meaning if I have 3 buyers, I will first listen to whatever Europe and USA is saying or asking me for my product. And once they cannot take the product form that I have, or once I am done with that capacity for peeling, then I can go back to China and say, listen, China, okay, I have these containers, but this is the price. This is the price I've been selling at. And it took them a while to get on board to the price increase. They've been scared away from price increasing because they've been burnt in the past heavily. In 2019, they bought a lot of product in November, and in February, the market crashed and the prices went down, and importers lost $1 a kilo or $1.50 a kilo. So they're very, very conscious about the price increases. So they were very afraid of paying into and buying into this new price increase, while USA and Europe needed the shrimp because their retail had grown, their food service was reopening, is still on the way to reopen, and they were needing shrimp because we have they have problems in India, they have problems. Everybody has problems all over the world with logistics and delivering containers on time, even though exports are up. Imports, in the States are up. It's because the consumption has clearly gone up. So when the Chinese realized that we had other options, and we had found these other options to be suitable for us, and had adjusted our facilities to produce these products that we weren't producing in the past, they had to pay a higher price to increase. And since January, where they were started very low, until now, they have increased from 20% of our export market to now about 45, 48% of our export market. So again, China is back on the map for Ecuador. Why is it back on the map from 20 to 48? Because Ecuador went from 100 million pounds a month to 160, 167 million pounds a month last month. So when you increase from 100 to 167 million, that's 67 million extra pounds that we can't peel. So we have to pack it and head on and ship to China. So that's basically why we are going back to that dependency, is because the volume produced in that month forced us to get back into China. And now China wants the product because they clearly have been short from receiving product from us for 4 or 5 months. So they want the product right now. They need it. The importers are hungry for product, and they're fighting the prices against the prices from Europe and the United States.
Sure. And to quickly bring in one of the questions we've had from our audience, do you have a sense over the next year or two, will China be looking to Ecuador to fulfill its kind of import demand, or do they look elsewhere as well, depending on other supply pictures?
Well, I think that for Chinese authorities and for Chinese importers, the first thing they're looking for is kind of COVID numbers. It is very important to them. They don't want to import anything COVID. They've made a whole sensationalism, I don't know if that's the proper word, about how we don't want COVID to come in on packaging, either from salmon, from chicken, from beef. We don't want COVID to come in here, right? So if they've already done that part, they can't turn around and say, I'll buy from whoever has it. They have to narrow it down a little more and say, okay, I'm buying from Ecuador, but there are these checks in place. I'll buy from India, but there will be these checks in place. And in the past few weeks, we've seen several notifications of containers found with COVID traces or something. And there's a new plan in place where they suspend people. To the end of the line, they will be searching for seafood everywhere in the world, but they will also be defending their own seafood production during the time that they have it. So this is the moment where they start to produce. Of course, it's not enough what they produce, and they know they need the imports. They will continue to look for it for sure. It's just they have to, if they want to continue to look for it and become a number one on anybody else's mind, they have to loosen up a little on their restrictions. They're frightening people away from selling to China.